Hello, testing. You hear this okay? Cool. This is also for the online folks so that they can hear. Should we get started?
Let's do it.
Yay, awesome. Hi, everyone. Wow, I can't believe that we have kind of a beautifully packed and also intimate room for this discussion. Feel free to sit closer, relax. I'm going to start with a video to ground us. Saidi, will you play the video? Share it on the screen.
Welcome to Material Liberation, a People's Fashion Show.
This event asks the question, how can we seek and search and find freedom through fashion, through aesthetics, and through clothing? It is to play, it is to come together, it is to be in community, and it is to be deeply in love and deeply in struggle.
Awesome. Shout out to Tenny and to the education team at the People's Forum, Saidi, and everyone who's had their hands in putting together Material Liberation. That was the first iteration in 2021. And so now we're headed into our third year of the People's Fashion Show. So yeah, I'm Tahia. I'll introduce myself in a bit, but welcome to the People's Forum. Yay! You're here on a afternoon and evening to talk about the political economy of the fashion industry. That's a feat, and so I'm really glad that you're here. Raise your hand if this is your first time in a class or discussion style here at TPF. Oh my gosh, okay, so we have a lot of new faces, welcome. Raise your hand if you've been here before. Amazing. Bunch of courses online. Check out peoplesforum.org. There's an entire incredible fall curriculum that's going to come out, and stay tuned for that. But yeah, so thanks for joining us today for an introductory class, but mostly like a discussion on the political economy of the fashion industry. Obviously, we know that New York Fashion Week just descended upon us, and we are watching, and we are being fed street style, runway looks, trend after trend for this coming year. And what used to be seasonal trends have become micro trends, and so it is constantly cycling into new production. And businesses are following suit. They're creating fast fashion, consumer ready-to-wear versions of these runway looks. And globally, fashion is a $1.7 trillion industry, one of the most lucrative in the world. But who are the hands that are making the clothing that fill department stores and that arrive in plastic packages to our doorsteps? And where do the clothes go after? Those are the questions that I wonder, that I think about, and that I hope that we can illuminate a little bit today and discuss together. So the goal today is to touch on and unveil some of the mysteries of the industry, to look at it concretely and materially so that we can open the door for more exploration and questions as organizers, as activists, as cultural workers. How many of us are in the fashion industry? You can raise your hand. Okay, we have a few folks. Do you mind calling out what you do? Design bags. What's your name? Mel designs bags. How about you?
I design dresses.
Design dresses. You have designers. What's your name? Anna. Awesome. Anyone else in the fashion industry? You're a designer? Shout out your name.
Fatu.
Fatu? Awesome. Cool. So we have some designers in the house. How many of us love fashion? Yeah, a lot of hands up. And how many of us are not in fashion, don't really care that much about fashion style? Yeah, awesome. And I love to see that there are hands up for that as well. Because fashion is every single day. It's the clothes that we wear on our body. It's an everyday commodity. So while today we are talking about clothing, we could just as easily be talking about the production of cell phones, of Nestle food products, of medical technology. And so the questions we're going to ask today, like this is the form of analysis we should undertake for other commodities that we are experiencing in our day-to-day lives. So this particular political education series is leading up to Material Liberation, a People's Fashion Show, Volume 3, called Freedom Dreams, on October 14th, which is going to be pretty incredible. It's where local designers will display their work and celebrate the beauty of fashion, but in the spirit of the future that we want to build. So without the capitalist fanfare and for us, by us. We actually have Kirby over here, who is going to be designing and displaying their pieces at the fashion show, and is also co-facilitating this political education series. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself and also tell us about the next class we'll have next week.
Is this on? Yes, it is. Hi, everyone. Can everyone see me? Yes? Okay. Hi, my name is Kirby. That's really my name. No! Okay. Kirby's really my name. My dad really named me Kirby Haitian. Hello. I'm lucky to be part of the amazing Material Liberation crew. And I do want to shout y'all out because y'all are here. Tenny, if you can stand up. Somebody who's been consulting with the People's Forum to put this show on for the past 3 years. Saidi, who does political education work and has been helping us to get grants. We didn't really get those, but... and Yue, who's downstairs, and also a radical designer named Justice, who will be here, I think, the day of the show, but lives on the West Coast. And I just want to uplift Tahia. This was part of your brainchild that you brought to the People's Forum. So please give these folks a round of applause. Please, 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 please. You know. You can be humble, but I'll give y'all the accolades.
Sani brought it, and we made it come to life here.
Right.
In a month? Yeah.
Now we had more time. And we still need more time. Yeah. So again, my name is Kirby. I'm a longtime organizer here in New York City. I've been lucky to do a lot of police brutality, mass incarceration work, coalition work here in New York City. And on the side, I might, design something here, 1 or 2 things, real quick.
They're incredible.
And I've been lucky to be able to help put on the political education series. I'm not going to facilitate with Tahia today. They're going to hold it down all by themselves, which they can. But the next class on October 4th is going to be about activism and aesthetics. And what the class is about is what it sounds like it's about. I think that we don't think about sometimes that there is an aesthetic that we have to our liberation work. Every shirt that we silkscreen, every placard that we make, every banner that we make, every graphic that we make, every keffiyeh that you wear, every beret that you put on, every radical red, rainbow, pastel ribbon that you put on. Whether in this room or online, hey folks who are online, it's because radical people took the time to have common sense and fight back. And understood that there is a visible aspect of revolutionary work. That it's okay to show who we are by what we wear, what we make, and how we show our art, okay? So it's not just about the major fashion houses that are exploiting people. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what we do to amplify our message as radical people to our communities. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what the class is gonna be about next week. And we're also gonna talk about the co-optation of our slogans and what that looks like, and how being tapped into the culture, and we're gonna talk about what culture is, because it's not what we think it is something that can be scary to folks who oppress us. and what co-optation means with our slogans as well. So please come if you can come out. We're gonna stream, right, Sadie, I believe? So if you can't make it, because who knows, it might be a snowstorm next week. At this rate, climate chaos, that's another class. That's not this class. And definitely, if you want, bringing some of those aesthetics. If you want to bring a beret, if you want to bring a candle, if you want to bring a book, if you want to bring a poster, bring it in. We welcome all of that into the space as we dive in politically about what fashion, but most importantly, what aesthetics means to liberation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kirby. I'm excited for next week, and we'll email you about that. And I'll introduce myself as well. I'm Tahia Islam. I'm a community organizer here in New York City for a long time now, and I was previously the education coordinator here at the People's Forum, so developing political education classes, coordinating courses, and things like material liberation. And actually, when not organizing or studying, I love to style artists and style photo shoots using vintage, using secondhand. And actually, that started because for 5 years I was selling thrifted and vintage clothing, which is where a lot of this passion and interest came from. So I'm Bangladeshi, and in 2017, 2016, I learned about the 2013 collapse of the garment factory in Rana Plaza in Dhaka, Bangladesh. How many of y'all have heard about that? Yeah, really, it's actually the 20-year anniversary of it. 10-year, decade-long anniversary of it this year. So over 1,000 garment workers died making clothes for Joe Fresh, for Zara in Bangladesh. And at that point, I was a college student, and I was illuminated to the human costs of the industry of like, these are my folks back home, right? And I started learning about the environmental destruction, started learning about the human cost. And I was like, all right, you know what? I don't know what I want to do, but I'm going to sell secondhand now. And, over the years, my political analysis has developed and it's refined itself because I realized that, just selling secondhand, it's not going to combat the labor violations or the environmental degradation of fast fashion or combat the really structural problems of capitalism. Thinking that selling secondhand was going to change this was an individualistic and neoliberal Western take on trying to combat or illuminate things around this. And so over the years, I've learned it's much more complex, it's systematic, it's structural, and it's a direct result of the parasitic nature and unfettered growth of capitalism. So I'll talk some more about that today. And for some basis, I am not an economist, I am not a historian, I'm an organizer and I'm a learner, thinker, and for this sake, in the practice of having a Marxist analysis on our everyday experiences, this class we developed, and I hope it opens some room for discussion as we kind of go through a couple of different historical things and different terminologies and things like that. Okay, so you ready to start? Cool, awesome. So let's kind of go into political economy. What is that? What are we talking about when we say political economy? And let's go into some of the common terms that we use to help understand it. Can anyone read this definition of some sort? Yeah.
Political economy is the study of what is produced by a society and how it is divided up. Marxist political economy says that society is set up by people and that the relationship of people to the means of production, such as land, factories, machinery, and raw material, is very key to looking at that society.
Yeah. Thank you, Angie. And so let's go into the means of production. What does that mean? So the means of production are, and for some people this might be repetitive and something that you know already, but for me it's always really helpful to break these things down over and over and over again to really understand. So the means of production on one hand are the useful materials that come from natural sources like minerals, coal, petroleum, wood, water, And on the other hand are the instruments of production, so the tools, the machinery, the increasingly advanced equipment which makes it possible to extract or to harvest these useful natural materials and then to transform them and industrially transport them and transform them. But that doesn't happen by itself, right? There's labor power that is a part of it. So it's the labor power of humanity that makes it possible to transform these natural resources into items for human use. It is human labor power that makes it possible to extract natural resources from above or below the ground, bring it to a place where we can use it, and it's our labor power that makes it possible to utilize the machines or the equipment of the factories. So together, the means of production and the human labor power is the productive forces. And under capitalism, capitalists own the factories with equipment and machinery, and moreover, they possess the capital to purchase raw materials and to pay workers. And then workers, us, we own our labor power. So this is the capitalist mode of production. This is what we say when we're talking about the political economy of the fashion industry under capitalism. And all products of labor manufactured for sale are called commodities. And a commodity is a product that's made not for immediate use, but for sale on the market, right? So we're making clothes for sale on the market. We're making Nestle food products for sale on the market, medical technology for sale on the market. It's not what we are making, like a handicraft item in our backyard that we use for ourselves at home. It is for sale. And under capitalism, our labor power becomes a commodity. So in order for the working class not to starve, we must apply for work under the capitalist who owns the factory, who owns the land, the plant, the railroad, the garment factory. And so under capitalism, to survive, people must sell their own labor power. And under capitalist commodity production, labor power, the labor that workers own and have to sell, it itself becomes a commodity. So this is why we can't simply just look at a t-shirt as like, this is an item that's just like appeared magically or naturally at the store. But in a materialist Marxist analysis, we have to understand how and why it's produced. The labor power behind it, the relations of production, the people, the exploitative nature under capitalism, and all the historical processes that went into creating the thing that's in our hands now that you are literally wearing on your bodies now. So, fashion, $1.7 trillion industry. That is really hard to conceive of. How do you think that it's become such a big behemoth of a thing? It's only gotten to where it has because of the labor of the third world. And that under capitalism, the concentration of production and capital has developed to such a high stage, it has created monopolies which rules our economic life, which rules the decisions that are made. So fashion as an industry used to be domestic, right? We employ thousands at home. You wear those proud, like made in USA shirts from Los Angeles to Chinatown. Or it's a display of local craftsmanship and textiles. And now we have this $1 trillion industry that frankly rules our life. And so you have a Primark and you have a Kohl's, whether it's in here in New York or whether it's in South Africa or whether it's in the UK. That is where we buy our clothing from. Like, who goes to a tailor now to buy all of their clothes handmade? Raise your hand if you do. A little bit, every once in a while. I mean, everything that you're wearing, yeah. I mean, that's no longer the way in which we live our lives, right? None of us. Who knows that all of the clothes that they're wearing are made here in the USA or locally? None of us. Everyone here know, like, who exactly made the clothing that's on your back? No. This process has been obscured. This $1.7 trillion industry that rules our life has been obscured. And it is a massive global fashion supply chain. It's something that I don't fully understand. It's something that confuses me. It's something that I have just been digging into and want to understand more. So here are some of the steps that are laid out, right? We have design, raw materials, garment production, distribution, retail. But by the time that we get to retail, by the time we get to the store, the Gap, the H&M, the Zara, so much has happened. So many parts are invisibilized. Like, there's so many things that are not on here. There's the people who grow the silk, people who grow the cotton, the linen. Where is that happening? How is that happening? There's textile manufacturers, people who are employed to determine supply, buying and selling. There's third-party logistics providers. There's marketers and creative directors at advertising agencies and fashion companies. There is an entire section of textile waste management, which should be at the end of this, but it's not, because it's obscured, because what's produced must also decompose, right? Can we think of any others that are not on this very simply drawn supply chain? Any other things that you think comprise of the global fashion supply chain? You can just name it out. Pesticides, okay. Yeah, we'll get into that for sure. Anything else that's not named here? Yeah.
So there would be distribution in between raw materials and garment production again.
Yeah, so it should be like raw materials, distribution, garment production, then distribution again. So like the multiple times that we have to distribute things across the world. Yep, advertising, all of the marketing and like intellectual labor that goes into producing and like politicizing and distributing this stuff so that we like buy it and want to buy it, right? Anything else? Yeah. Yep. Where does it go after it's finished? The textile waste. Exactly. So there's a bunch of stuff, right? So I guess what we'll do today is to discuss and unveil a bit of the parts of this supply chain. We'll talk a little bit about raw materials, about garment production, textile waste, and see what led to it, its human and environmental consequences, and just like dig into it a little bit more. And I really encourage you to jot down some questions, because I am learning this alongside you, as this is something I'm really passionate about, and I want to see what it is that we are all asking about our items. So, raw materials. The huge growth in the fashion industry would not be possible without intensive industrialization of agriculture. Clothing manufacturers depend on the third world for cheap capital and labor to maintain the speedy production of fast fashion, right? But to create the fast fashion, there is an increased demand for cotton. And it's Indian, it's African, it's global farmers that provide a cheap version of this crop to these companies. But the cheap version of this crop is a version that is genetically modified by a seed monopolist called Monsanto. The Monsanto company was an American agrochemical and agricultural biotechnology corporation that was founded in 1901 and headquartered in Missouri. And across the third world, there is an inescapable dependency on this company. Monsanto has a trademark and a monopoly on the genetically modified cottonseed because it added a traceable gene that it can identify which seed is theirs, which means that local agriculturals can't make their own versions, that maybe might be cheaper or better for the local environment. And this gene in particular, the intention is to make the cotton plant grow faster and to control weeds. But it also makes the crop require pesticides to prevent destructive insects, which we've seen a lot of proliferation of in these local farms. And guess what? These pesticides are also sold by Monsanto. And so it creates this like unavoidable dependence on the seed producer by the farmer. And this was something that was unforeseen by the Indian agrarian society, who had no choice but to buy into the Monsanto seed monopoly. This is true in India, this is true in Burkina Faso, across Africa, across the global south. And we've seen that across the decades, it's really put farmers into a lot of crippling debt because they need to take out loans to be able to buy this product, to be able to use this product. If the cotton's not being used that time, what if their fields get destroyed? It becomes like a vicious cycle. And then there is a statistic, and I will also link all the sources later, and I'm happy to send it to anyone who asks afterwards. But it's estimated that every 30 minutes, an Indian farmer takes their life due to indebtedness to Monsanto. Yeah, and so we see this in cotton, but we see it in a lot of different industries across the agricultural sector as well. So we see that there's a monopoly on the agricultural process. And there's also a monopoly on the garment production process. So to get into garment production, I'm actually going to ask you to take a look at the tag of your current shirt, of what you're wearing right now. And if you can't see it yourself, maybe turn around, ask a neighbor to check it out for you. Don't mess up that collar. Where is it made in? And also, yeah, keep track of like the materials. I hear some of y'all saying something is 100% cotton, etc. Cool. Oh, I hear some thrifted. I hear some 100% cotton, Bangladesh. All right. So what are you getting? You can just call it out. Indonesia, China, Thailand.
Well, I get Germany, but I bought this in Germany too.
Germany, cool. Awesome. Singapore. Vietnam. Italy, Turkey. Cool. Awesome. My shirt, made in Bangladesh. Myself as well. You know, not particularly made in Bangladesh, but, you know, descendant of made in Bangladesh. My parents come from Bangladesh, when I was born and raised here in New York. Anyone have made in Bangladesh? Cool, we have a made in Bangladesh, yeah. So for virtue of the fact that there is a lot of Bangladeshi producers and garment factories, and because that's also my heritage, we're going to look at Bangladesh as an example for today. Because fashion production currently employs an estimated 4.2 million people in Bangladesh, with clothing and footwear production accounting for 80% of all Bangladeshi exports. So how did we get here? That's a really big number. Well, for one, we historically know that the Bengal region in Bangladesh has undergone colonialism. Historically, the British Empire shaped the world through slavery, through military aggression, through financial power. And it's in this imperialist process that it amassed vast wealth through a deliberate deindustrialization and then wealth extraction, strategically destroying, this is made in Bangladesh, strategically destroying local industries in the Bengal region that was like a really big mainstay of the economic production. And so one of those was hand-spun cotton and the muslin industry, which the British Empire then made into a more easily replicable, and commodifiable item, doing things like strategically making it not okay to wear muslin when you're in Bangladesh during this time, to the point now where muslin is, the version of muslin that exists now is so unlike what it used to be, which was a really soft and thin and delicate item. And actually, you can find muslin in some museums in the glass, but it's really hard to find people who can create this ancient type of textile production. And so, just historically looking at how entire economic craftsmanship processes have been destroyed through the process of colonialism. And the professor and economist Utsa Patnaik, has anyone heard of the Patnaiks? They're really awesome, and you should look into their things more. But they calculated that between 1765 and 1938, Britain drained 45 trillion US dollars from India and from the Bengal region. And so that's a lot to kind of grow from, right? Like, this grounds us in the historical economic realities of the region, a region that's been underdeveloped, that's been plagued by profit plundering British Empire, and that's been playing catch up for the next decades. This is true here, this is true across Africa. You can read Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa and see like how different processes of how we've been strategically underdeveloped and how we've had to like work our way out of it. And how we've had to play catch up. So as we look at the historic example, the contemporary globalization of the fashion industry that we're talking about today, it propels itself from 1970 to 1990-ish. And that era is generally called, does anyone know what it might be? 1970 to 1990. Yeah. It's the neoliberal era. It's the rise of neoliberalism throughout the US and throughout the world, throughout the West, throughout the global South. And in the 1970s in the US, there was vast inflation and reduced value of the dollar, which had proliferated the world at that point, because the US was spending so much at home on its own industry, abroad on development projects like the International Monetary Fund, which we refer to as the IMF and the World Bank, and on military expenditure at that time, like the Vietnam War. And so to stop that like ever increasing inflation, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, instituted something that's coined now as the Volcker shock, which raised interest rates like crazy to curb borrowers and to slow the economy, forcing them into debt repayments here in the West and in the US. And so interest rates went up on everything from credit card debt to mortgages to business loans. And when it's more expensive to take out a business loan, businesses contract and hire less. When mortgages are pricier, people buy fewer homes. When credit card rates are higher, people spend and charge less. So the result is less spending and thus less inflation, but also slower growth. So industries in North America and in Europe started suffering huge job losses, mass unemployment, slower economic growth in general. But actually, it was at this time that Asia, in particular, experienced major job gains. And why is that? It's because companies, fashion companies, corporations, they began offshoring industries, particularly of clothing, of footwear, of textiles, to underdeveloped countries where there are low-wage workers, lower manufacturing costs, lower environmental regulations, and companies no longer felt the need to protect the US industry. And so you can see here, and I again will link all of the sources later on. This is coming from the International Labor Organization, but it's how we can see from the West and from the US, how between 1970 and 1990, the percent of change in the textile industry workforce really moved itself over to the global South, and in particular to Asia. And so this shift changed not just where clothes are made, but also how much people are paid to make them and the conditions that they are made in. And the entire industry transitioned from the formal sector to the informal sector, with negative consequences for worker wages, for working conditions. And Bangladesh was the perfect place for this experiment, because we're a newly developing, newly nationally liberated country with a precarious economic status. And we were up for grabs for the world. And so after independence in 1971, Bangladesh's economy actually had strong trade restrictions, which meant high tariffs on imports, on domestic, and favored domestic production over foreign imports. So they wanted to stay internal, like they wanted to focus on their internal economy. And in the 1980s, had like a moderate relaxing of the strategy. And then in the 1990s, large-scale liberalization of trade was implemented, not just in Bangladesh, but across the world. And that's a cornerstone of like neoliberal economics. It's basically opening up the economy to the world, to foreign investment, to privatization. And this trade liberalization really benefited the garment industry, as exporters were provided with easy access to credit, to low import taxes on machinery and on tax rebates. And furthermore, the International Monetary Fund, so the IMF and the World Bank, they wanted Bangladesh to really like let go of hopes for like their own economic self-sufficiency and sovereignty. And they wanted them to open up their economy to global markets. And we know that that is a pattern across the global south and across Africa. And so what is the result? The result is an overdependence on garment exports, and big fashion companies gained access to a really cheap labor pool. And 40 years on from the start of trade liberalization, Bangladesh remains in this precarious trap. They're creating vast profits for some of the most powerful multinational corporations in the world, but yet they're unable to achieve like full financial stability. And that's a prime example of national ambition that is like stopped by the neoliberal solutions that really only result into a dead end. And do we think that becoming economically dependent on like a single product and commodity is like good for a country and its economy? No, it's pretty disastrous, right? Like capitalism is fickle. It goes up a few years, it goes down a few years. And so if you're just a country that's exporting garments, you don't really have a lot of flexibility. You're an entire society focused on this one commodity. And so there's a professor and researcher, Richard Wolff, who says that the product controls you rather than you controlling the product. And then it continues to be a really tough cycle, because when crisis strikes, countries are forced to borrow money from banks and financial companies, from other countries, from global institutions like the IMF. They take out loans, when it's time to pay back the loan or the interest on it, a new drain is already put on this poor society. And then when commodity prices fall, as we saw with fashion during the COVID-19 pandemic, more money must be borrowed, and then the cycle of debt continues. So in the late 1970s, Bangladesh had an estimated 12 garment factories. And then by 1985, there were 450 factories. And then by 2015, 7,000. And we're not just talking fast fashion, but we're also talking luxury brands and design houses, because they're also relying on a lot of the labor coming out of the third world. So Bangladesh was considered an economic success, but at what cost? So, there's a lot of conversation about who are the workers in these factories. By the 1990s, the factory workforce was 90% women. And so it's mostly feminized labor. There's a lot of replication of patriarchy in the workforce, on the shop floor. There were arguments made that, maybe the smaller fingers of women garment workers in Bangladesh and in Cambodia and in Thailand, they lend to faster garment making, which is like the same sort of racialized, racist nonsense that condoned enslavement of Africans to carve up Africa's natural resources and exploit their labor power. There will always be excuses made to exploit our labor power. And there are a lot of arguments made that it gives women freedom to make money, to get out of the house, and to spend their own money. I think I'll pause here for a second, because this is like a big thing in the culture right now. Is there anything that comes to mind or you want to share when you think about the feminized labor on the work in the shop floor? Any thoughts? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna go right here in the front. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say it makes me think of all of the other things that people say generally about like countries who have had factories be built inside of them. And how a lot of people are like, oh, it's bringing jobs. Like, okay, it's like they're not good jobs, but at least there's some jobs. And it's really just a kind of a blind, like just a very limited view of like what is really going on there. And it's so easy to just say that. So yeah, I think it's like how you mentioned earlier about things are not completely shown. A lot of the steps in the process are intentionally obscured, and I think this is a way to do it. So,
Yeah, thank you for sharing. We'll get one more in the back.
I guess it comes to mind that the condition that the woman of the house has to work. Anyways, like that came out of just like the oppression of the families to begin with, but then hiding it under like women's liberation is really insidious, really. But that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We'll get one more. Yeah, up here.
I think that there's some truth to the fact that there is like a component of financial independence, but I think like the real root of the issue is sort of undervaluing women's work, and that's in the domestic sector too, like even housework or like caretaking work. So I think the like a bigger conversation is how we properly compensate it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for all of the comments. I think there's a lot of conversation to have about social reproduction, about the labor in the house, about care work, about feminized labor. And that can be some of the discussion that we have a little later today. And I also recommend us to look at some of the political education materials that come out of a course that is held here at the People's Forum called Revolutionary Feminism, which is a Marxist understanding of feminism. And these are some of the discussions that will happen there. And so you can see some of it at politicaleducation.peoplesforum.org, but I'm sure there will be another iteration of the class to come soon. And I think another part of all of this I really want to talk about is a lot of the Western anger about the labor violations and the exploitations that happen on the shop floor gets directed to like the managerial class in the third world who, under the hand of global capitalism and constantly being like asphyxiated, are forced to reduce wages and to employ these exploitative methods. I have family who are in the garment industry in Bangladesh. I've visited garment factories in Bangladesh, and it's a really complex thing to wrap my head around. But what I do know is that we can kind of understand this as the petit bourgeois and all of the arguments that come around the petit bourgeois, which we won't get into today. But what that is that layer of small capitalists that precariously sit between labor and capital, and which act as an intermediary between the small capitalist class and the very large proletariat. So they might not be the ones that own the companies, but they are the middle managers of the production process. They're part of the buying and selling, they're part of the supply chain, they are the connection to the US or to Western companies, they're determining stock. And in Bangladesh, you'll see that these are primarily men. And it creates a really easy patriarchal argument that we make on the West. Of men versus women on the shop floor and the patriarchal awfulness of the third world and how that's replicated in the garment factories. But, it's a little bit more complex than that as well. Because what pushes these middle management workers to these labor violations or these exploitative practices? It's competition, which shapes the fashion industry. So big fashion corporations in the West are competing to make the highest profits, while countries compete to supply that big fashion. And so if they can't get it from Bangladesh, where are they going to go? They're going to go to Thailand, they're going to go to Vietnam, they're just going to keep pushing and going around, right? And so countries within Asia ruthlessly compete with each other for contracts. And like even within India, states compete against other states. And so because it's pretty easy to buy and to install machinery to make clothing, and the skills needed to work these machines are like pretty easily taught, it becomes this struggle where factory owners across these countries compete to produce the sneakers, to produce the blouses, underwear, and socks for the market. And if all of these factory owners are all submitting bids for contracts to make the t-shirts and are all in competition with each other, how do they achieve the lowest bid? They have to find the cheapest workers. They have to work them mercilessly. They reduce wages. They union bust. They don't want to rent or build safe buildings. And it's another vicious cycle. And there really isn't corporate liability. Now that Western countries have subcontracted this production to the global South, these clothing companies that we know and we might love, they concentrate on building brands instead. So this means that that link between corporations and like the legal liability to make sure that the clothes are produced in like a ethical way is severed. And then fashion corporations, they now they shrug the responsibility off their shoulders by branding themselves as the buyers rather than primary employers, as if they didn't control like every aspect of the production process, including speeding up production times because they need to meet new demands coming from the West, coming from these micro trends from the runway that we want to wear onto the streets, right? So there's a lot there, and I think that is some of the things coming out of garment production on the supply chain that I wanted to like unveil today. Then there is a big discussion to be had about the environmental impacts. So for example, this picture is in Malaysia in 2018, 195,300 tons of textile waste into landfills. But this is Malaysia, this is Angola, it's Bangladesh, Guatemala, you name it. Why are we overproducing fast fashion? It's a basic calculation of profits and losses. It's both cheaper and logistically easier for retailers to order too much and then to deal with the excess later. So it's convenience, it's financial gain. And also a lot of manufacturers have like a minimum threshold in terms of orders. And so brands might be forced to resort to overproduction if they want to produce anything at all. But it's not just fast fashion. And I think that is a big point I want to put out today. Overproduction is very, very, very applicable and apparent in luxury brands as well, in the big fashion houses. What makes luxury brands luxury, quote unquote? And yeah, can you say that? Perception, anything else? Price point? Exclusivity? Yes. Exactly. It's to maintain an illusion of exclusivity. That's what makes it a luxury brand. And so to maintain that facade, because do you think that every $4,000 Louis Vuitton bag is getting bought at the end of a season in a cycle? No. I walk by these stores on Fifth Avenue and we're like hardly allowed in, right? And so there's a lot of statistics out there of Burberry burning excess products. The total value of goods it's destroyed over their past 5 years amounts to more than $90 million, $37 million in 2018 alone. And they do this because they want to destroy unwanted items and prevent them from being stolen or from being sold cheaply. And this particular picture is an example that's coming from a dumpster diving mama on TikTok who has found through dumpster diving bags and bags of Coach handbags that have been slashed through so that these cannot be bought and that they aren't resold onto the market. And so there's a lot of overproduction from anywhere from bags to watches to luxury scarves and things like that. Another part of the environmental destruction and environmental impacts, but also something that comes out of the supply chain, is that textile waste has become an industry in and of itself. So like whether that's post-industrial, like coming out of the manufacturing processes, like the excess fabric, or like, you know, when you're doing quality checks of clothes on the production line, and if it doesn't match the quality check, then they throw it out. That, or post-consumer textiles, meaning like what stores get rid of at the end of a season, or that what we as people get rid of. So within third world countries, it's become a secondary market. So in Bangladesh, there are street vendors in Dhaka that are selling Nike and Champion overstock or canceled orders from manufacturers. There are stalls in Sri Lanka and Guatemala on the side of the road that are selling secondhand clothing coming from waste of the West. Europe literally sells packets of textile waste to different places in Africa. I'm sure we've, you know, a lot of us have been to different places or are from different places around the world. Have you seen these things yourself? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of head nods. Anyone want to share? Yeah, back there.
I mean, like, I remember my cousins wearing literally like the losers for the Super Bowl, but say that the Super Bowl won. Like they were the winners of the Super Bowl, but they actually lost because they just produced those shirts anyways, and then they just like dump them in another country, and then they sell them, and then or they just get them. So.
Yeah, it's a really potent example. Thank you for sharing. Back there, and then up here after.
Similarly to that same situation, I remember going to Nigeria right after the election for Hillary against Trump, and in Port Harcourt, which is like the city, they are selling like "Go Hillary," like "Congrats Hillary," like T-shirts all through. It's kind of like the most thing that like different like sellers are selling, and this is like right after the election. So I'm coming from America knowing like she didn't win, like why, and also like what does this have to do with y'all? So I think that was really interesting.
So I went to Bangladesh over this summer, and I know exactly where this place is.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like I have walked the streets with my mom, and I remember my friends, they were wearing like the North Face jackets, like the sweaters. And I know like it's like hella priced over here, it's like 100 and stuff. And I think they bought it for like the equivalent of like $2 because the currency difference is so much.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. New Market?
Yeah.
New Market. Yeah. Cool. Anyone else want to share? Yeah, but we've all seen examples of these secondary markets all around the world. It's an entire industry that comes out of textile waste. So that is so invisibilized in the global supply chain, so much so that it wasn't even on the little infographic that I had earlier. Something that you have to pull out and like really remember is like a part of it. And then we get to pollution, the textile industry. It is one of the top 3 most polluting industries in the world. What is another really big polluting industry? We know it. There was a huge march on it, just a few. The military, fossil fuels. Yep, exactly. So textile industry is right after that. So we have the military and fossil fuels, and then we have clothing. So many ways in which it is destroying our planet, polluting the water, contaminating the air because it's in open landfills and like piled on top of each other, creating flammable gases. Land is polluted by the dye and the chemicals. Here's an example in Bangladesh on the right, and on the left, this is the chemical dye. And I'm sure, again, we can see examples of this all over the world. And so I don't have to get into all of the types of fibers that like leak and pollute the waters and the environment, but it's synthetic fibers in clothing and textiles. So natural fibers like cotton, hemp, and wool are typically supposed to biodegrade over time, while synthetic fibers don't. And so those are like fleece, rayon, polyester, and these are often the fibers that are marketed as wrinkle resistant, durable, easy to clean, and they're industrially produced. And it utilizes a lot of energy and toxic chemicals. So polyester, for example, is made from petroleum, which is a non-renewable fossil fuel. Rayon, which is semi-synthetic, is derived from wood pulp, but then transformed into fiber through a very high water and chemical intensive process that notoriously pollutes factories. And so, yeah, it's manufactured into our clothing, into bath towels, into sheets, and we bring them home as consumers, and it pollutes our waters in the forms of microplastics. So whether it's the dye and the chemicals in the countries producing it, or whether it's us, we buy it, we purchase it, we put it through our laundry machines, and it's creating microplastics. And so there's a lot there. There's the raw materials, the garment production, the textile waste. And what we do know, and probably a reason why a lot of you guys are here today, is what has been the response under capitalism and under this neoliberal era. I think that's what I've been trying to grapple with for the last 5-6 years. And I'm sure a lot of us are also wondering this, right? So as consumer awareness of this industry rises, Western companies have responded with their own version. So we got conscious collections from brands with no specifics at all. We have like totally vague processes described. We have a lot of conversations around ethical consumption, around sustainability, but a lot of these conversations aren't addressing the root cause, that it's capitalism, that it's structural, that it's beyond us, and that we need to know what the real enemy is in this process. It is Western desires and like increased desire for profit making. And so, you know, when we guilt each other to use paper straws or to buy ethically, we absolve corporations of their responsibility. You know, we know that the #1 climate polluter in the world is the US military, but we tell ourselves that if we use reusable containers all the time, we are the ones that can help fix this. And I'm not railing against anything around individual responsibility as well, but I think that it is really easy to focus on that and take away from actually knowing who our real enemy is. And that is to the benefit of these corporations, and it's to the benefit of capitalists. Okay, we've gone into a lot. But with repression that has come up in the shop floor in the garment factories, also comes resistance, right? There's been a lot of response of workers. There's been a lot of response of labor and garment organizing. In Bangladesh, there's been robust unionizing efforts within factories that are led by women, non-governmental organizations involved. There's a lot of union busting that happens as well. And while and so it's like a process that we need to be aware of and support that is happening. And we also know who our real structural enemy and issue is. And so I wanted to show a trailer from a documentary made by a comrade, Shamtali Hook, who went in 2015 to Bangladesh to cover the labor movement after Rana Plaza. And she's a law professor at CUNY and creates a lot of different exploratory content. So I want us to watch this and just take note of all the different factors and facets and nuances and yes, and so it's called Shromik Awaz or Shromik Awaj, which means workers' voices. Yeah. Okay, so let's watch it. 5-minute video.
আমি গরিব ঘরের, আমি লেখাপড়া করার আর সুযোগ পাইনি বিধায় আমি কিন্তু গার্মেন্টসে এসেছিলাম। নারী শ্রমিকের স্বামী কি করলো ওটাও সামলাইয়া চলা লাগে, সন্তান আছে সেটাও সামলান লাগে, আবার কাজে যাইতে হয়, আবার ঘরের কাজ ইয়ে করে সামলান লাগে।
আমি পুরুষ হিসাবে গার্জিয়ান, কারণ আমি তাকে সাপোর্ট দিতে হবে, অবশ্যই সে সাপোর্ট না দিলে সে কখনো আগাইতে পারবে না।
যখন আমার হাজবেন্ড নিবে না বলছে, তখন আমি ভাবছিলাম যে আমি আত্মহত্যা করে মারা যাব, মানে বিভিন্ন ধরনের চিন্তা ভাবনা নিছিলাম। আমি তো সুন্দর একটা মানুষ, আর এই পৃথিবীতে আসছি, যদি আমার জন্য যদি কিছু করতে না পারি তাহলে আমি মানুষের জন্য কিছু করার চেষ্টা করব। শ্রমিকদের কাজে যেহেতু আমি একবার মাইর খাইছি, তো কি হবে, আমাকে হয়তো মেরে ফেলবে, আর তো কিছু করতে পারবে না। তো আমি এইখানে ওদের পাশে থেকে, ওদের সাথে থেকে, আমি ওদের সহযোগিতার জন্য আমি যতদিন বাঁচি আমি কাজ করে যেতে চাই। অভাবের কারণে ঢাকার শহর আসছি, ঢাকার শহর আইসা আমাদের উপরে এরকম টর্চারিং চলতে আছে। প্রতিবাদ করতে হবে, একসময় দেখা গেল আমার পাশে অনেক শ্রমিক দাঁড়াইছি, তখন আমার একটা শক্তি হইল।
কারণ নেতা জানে যে ইউনিয়ন একটা বৈধ কর্মপন্থা।
যারা ইউনিয়ন করে তারপরে যদি মালিক শুনে, তারপরে ওই হেরা মানে ওইটা চান্সে থাকে, কোন অসুবিধা শুনে হেরা বাইর করে দিবে, একটা সুযোগ খুঁজে আর কি। আমাদের দাবি মেনে নিন, ওকে বেতন দিয়ে দিন, দাবি আদান সংগ্রাম, রাজপথের সংগ্রাম, শ্রমিক সংগ্রাম।
আমরা মনে করি না যে ওই আগেরকার দিনের মতো খালি রাজপথে নেমে আন্দোলন করলে বুঝি অধিকার আদায়, অনেক কৌশল আছে। আমরা আসলে সেই কৌশলেই আমাদের এই সংগঠনটা আমরা আগাবো এবং সেভাবে আমরা যাচ্ছি।
আমি শ্রমিক হিসাবে তো আমার একটা অধিকার আছে, আমি নারী হিসাবে তো আমার একটা অধিকার আছে, আমি নাগরিক হিসাবে তো আমার একটা অধিকার আছে, কিন্তু সেই অধিকার তো আমাদের সব জায়গা থেকে বঞ্চিত হইতেছি। আমরা যদি ঐক্যবদ্ধভাবে যদি মাল্টি ন্যাশনাল কোম্পানি এবং আমাদের যে লোকাল সাপ্লায়ার এদের বিরুদ্ধে আন্দোলন না করতে পারি, তাহলে আমাদের বাংলাদেশে বা এই সাউথ এশিয়া বা এশিয়া কন্টেন্টসে আমরা বেশি একটা অর্গানাইজ করতে পারবো না। সমস্ত বিশ্বব্যাপী শ্রমিকদের নিয়ে একটা আন্দোলন শুরু করতে হবে, সেই আন্দোলনে কিন্তু শ্রমিকরা সফল হবে তাদের অধিকার থেকে।
ওরে মে দিবসে ডাকে এসেছে, ওরে মে দিবসে ডাকে এসেছে, ওরে শ্রমিক ভাই, শ্রমিকের ন্যায্য মূল্য আমরা পেতে চাই, হাই রে শ্রমিকের ন্যায্য মূল্য আমরা পেতে চাই, ওরে মে দিবসে ডাকে এসেছে।
Yeah, I really appreciate this short trailer. There's a lot of updates that have come from this. This was in 2015. So a lot has happened since then. The Bangladesh Accords, there's a big like international binding agreement between trade unions, between different organizations, to agree on health and safety in Bangladesh garment industries that was signed for 5 years after Rana Plaza's collapse in 2013, and has been re-signed and like organized and fought around. And so there's a lot to dig into when it comes to this. I just think the main takeaway is that, folks' voices are not invisible or quiet. People are people who are organizing themselves. But we also know who the culprit is. I just always ask myself, like, what is our responsibility here in the belly of the beast? There's another short film, documentary-ish thing called Made in Bangladesh that has actually been screened here at the People's Forum, and you can check it out. It's on Amazon, and I think it's a really special short film that shows like how women have organized themselves and have taken over their shop floors to unionize, and shows their power. It's called Made in Bangladesh. Yeah. All right, almost done. We've headed into the future of fashion. The last slide, Saidi. What does it look like? There are so many new contradictions and questions that are going to arise from this. There's AI technology. There's automatic machines that are performing manufacturing processes with precision and with speed. It's reducing production time. It's minimizing errors. And so then new questions arise from this. What does it do to jobs? Does it lead to more sustainability? And those are the things that we have to keep our eyes open to and continue to study and ask ourselves and stay updated and aware of. And so, we have gone through a lot of the parts of a supply chain and try to illuminate some of them. And this is like a Marxist method of looking at fashion and looking at the fashion industry, like asking questions of who and why and what does this come from? Who made it? Why? When? And keeping our eyes on like the current time right now and the current conjuncture and what is about to happen. So I guess like that is where I leave us. Some things that I ask myself is, what is that aspirational nature of fashion? Why do we aspire to these trends? What is the pull? What is like the ideological chokehold that these companies have on us? How do we maintain the beauty of the fashion, and what could be beautiful coming out of the fashion industry, but without the exploitation of human beings? Those are the questions to ask. So much more to learn, so much that I'm asking and wondering. And I think I will end it there, and then I want to open it up to some discussion.
So sorry about that. All right, a huge round of applause for We do have about 10 more minutes of time left today, and I think you left us with some really beautiful, reflective questions. So I think if you guys want to open up, share any reflections you had from today, or any reflections from those last few questions, go on ahead, or any questions if you have it. We can just have a large-scale discussion. So I'm going to open up the floor.
Yeah, I would love to know some of your thoughts and any bigger questions that you're thinking of. What is our responsibility here in Belly of the Beast? I think one over here, and then maybe back there, and then one more, maybe. Thoughts, questions? Okay, we'll start here. Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about paper straws and the individual responsibility. What about brand boycotts? How do those work? Do they hurt factory workers? Or are they effective? Is that a good strategy against the brands who own these methods?
Yeah. Big question that I think about a lot back there.
Yes. So, sort of a two-part question. The first one is, how do you, given that we live in a capitalist world, and you did so much research and to really demonstrate how the political economy affects everything, and capitalism is the root of the problem. How do you navigate the market in terms of your buying decisions, and that's the first question. Second part is, in terms of solutions or being action oriented, what kind of, in your research or any kind of personal insight into industrial methods or business models or any solution oriented things that we can address now? The Marxist perspective, I guess, is great in terms of conceptually giving a mind map, but too often, I guess, it falls short of practicalities. So the practicality on the micro level would be, how do we take this knowledge and incorporate it into our buying decisions? And on a macro level, what alternate methods, industrial methods, do you recommend? Because we're sort of limited to the capitalist structure and capitalist technologies. And I think that capitalism may have historically been used as a tool of oppression, but is there potential for a tool of liberation, just transferring to more collective economics? It may not necessarily. So just your feedback on that.
Cool. And there's one, can we do up here? And then last, yeah. Hi.
Okay. Hey. I wanted to ask about regulation at the global north and how it affects countries at the global south. I mean, I'm thinking about regulation like the one we see now in the European Union, which really try to encourage local production in Europe, which from environmental perspective is a good thing. And yet I cannot not think about the people who are currently producing the manufacturing our clothes and what's going to happen with them once we take all the manufacturing from Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Central and move it to Europe. I mean, of course, it's not a good work. It's much more close to slavery, and yet. So I'm thinking about that. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think I got it. No, these are all really great questions and things that I am pondering and wondering about all the time. I think for the first thing around brand boycotts, I really open that up if anyone has any thoughts and feedback on that. But I think when it comes to my own personal buying decisions, I think it's not buying more than what I need, staying within what it is that I already have, purchasing when it's needed. But I think the big thing that we're always told is that is judging ourselves for purchasing when actually the working class buys clothes from H&M and from Zara, from Rainbow, and that's not something to judge. I used to sell thrifted clothes for a long time, and there's a big conversation around plus size folks not being able to find clothes in thrifted clothes. Yeah, folks buy clothes from corporations, and I think that is fine, and that judging ourselves about what it is that we're purchasing is a kind of a really a liberal individualistic way of looking at what we are structurally living under right now. And towards what it is that I hope for and I'm fighting for, I really would say join an organization, organize for me towards a socialist future, one in which the workers own the means of production, one in which having companies in the global south that are creating clothing and that are in relation to companies in the West isn't a bad thing, but it's about how do you limit human exploitation as much as possible. And so maybe that speaks to some of that regulation and these alternative methods. But those are conversations I would love for us to have after this class ends and talk with one another. These are things that have been opened up that I hope we can discuss. Yeah. Maybe one up here.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak again. I just had a comment on the response or the consequences of our situations now, how they have been caused, a lot of it by, there's capitalism, but there's also international trade laws which prevent a lot of these third world countries from developing. You mentioned it actually, and it's something that I think a lot about, and I think that it's a lot of the times it's not really in the focus because it's really complex and it's just so high up there. It's like international agreements between countries, right, that affect the everyday lives of these people. And like these trade laws have a history. They've come from imperialism, and they're basically have made the world order stuck in like the 70s, the 1960s, 70s, where colonialism had officially ended, but the trade laws froze development for everybody. And they, if they wanted, if countries like Bangladesh wanted to develop their economy, diversify, they aren't able to because the trade laws say that you cannot have, if you didn't already have subsidies, then you can't make new ones. And guess what? The US already had tons of subsidies, but countries like Bangladesh didn't because they had just become a country. They had just escaped imperialism. And so they were stuck and they couldn't protect, the term is protectionism. They couldn't practice the protectionism that European countries and the US practiced to build their own wealth. And then the US and the Europe go and say, well, you can't do what we did. You have to stay where you are now. And that's kind of, I think, such a big part of the reality that is really more not as discussed. And I think that that's something that I would love to explore more about. Like, how can we as individuals have effect on international agreements that way? I think it's a really difficult question, but it's just a comment on, another way of thinking or approaching an issue.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. That's like a additional point of research I want to like go back and do a brain spiral on. But those are like the questions to ask, whether it's about international trade laws when it comes to like clothing manufacturing or like opening up the country to different like economic measures, but it's also around sanctions, it's around blockades, it's around the ways in which Western countries have a chokehold on others through economic coercive measures. And there are like a couple of different processes that people who are experts in the legal industry or who are organizers who've been thinking about this for a really long time have been undertaking. Actually, one that I will call out is there's been a whole process of the International People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism, on sanctions, on blockades, on economic coercive measures. They've been doing hearings from everywhere from Cuba to Eritrea, to Venezuela, to Puerto Rico. And they're going to, after 9 powerful months of international hearings, they're going to do a closing event here on September 29th and the 30th. And so that's just like a place in which you can meet other people who are thinking about these things when it comes to international trade laws and how it affects us. Yeah. Another great spiral I want to go into. Yeah. Well, I think that's it. We're at 7:58. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'm sorry, y'all. That was an extremely whack round of applause. Let's give another round of applause to Tahia. And to all of you for joining us today. As we mentioned, this is part one of our two-part class leading up to our fashion show. So the fashion show, actually, hold on. Let me take my little red face over here. Is going to be on October 14th, and we have a few designers in the room. So shout out Mel, shout out Tenny, who's helped coordinate all of it. And so before that, we'll have our second part of this on next Wednesday with Kirby, as you met earlier today, on activism and aesthetics. And then we'll have our fashion show, which was, born out of a lot of discussion and struggle, and from amazing stylists and activists and organizers. We'll feature a lot of amazing organizers and designers in about 2 weeks. So as you know, we're fundraising for this fashion show. So if you're able to, whip out your Venmo and send the People's Forum a little, maybe $5 if you're able to help us support putting on this fashion show. And yeah, thank you guys so much for coming out today. We'll see you on Wednesday, right, for part 2. Give me a thumbs up if you'll be there. And then we'll see you again on October 14th for the fashion show, yeah? Give me a thumbs up if you'll be there. Give me 2 thumbs up if you're excited. There we go. All right, y'all, thanks for coming out, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. I hope you guys take some time to get to know each other, ask each other these questions, because I am curious. Incredible.